so in the final part of this, we're simply going to add in the effects of diminishing marginal utility. Um, and what this tries to take into account, okay, is, look, even though it's the case, okay, that these two things, or that the payment of $2,000 a week for your whole life, it has a present value very close to $2 million. Okay, so you figure that that would be kind of, a lot of people would be indifferent between that and just taking $2 million today. I suspect that many of you would still be tempted to take the $4,000 per week offer because at some level it gives you a more constant source of income over time. And given the choice, most people prefer to have a constant stream of income over time rather than occasional windfalls, occasional like huge lump sums. Okay. And the theory of expected utility that we discussed last time can actually help us to understand this phenomenon. Okay. Because here's the thing. When your utility shows diminishing returns with respect to income, it makes more sense to spread out your payments because the effect of diminishing returns is more pronounced for a large lump sum than it is for a bunch of smaller payments. Okay, and so let's just see an example of this. Okay, so you can see here now I have the full version of the calculator. I've added two columns in here that simply tell me the utility of my present value. Okay, so this is simply equal to the square root of this present value number. Remember, we're using the square root as our utility function. Okay, and then I have the running total of my utility, okay, as well as the running total of my present values. Okay, so let's compare those two options once again. So option number one is you get $2 million right now. So let me put that in. So I'm going to put in $2 million. Okay, so here's $2 million. $2 million today has a present value of $2 million. Okay, but what's the utility of that? So the utility of that is the square root of this number, and that value is ends up being 1,000 and ends up being 1,400. Okay, so I recorded that here. $2 million today is worth $1,400. Is worth 1,400 units of utility. Okay. So, okay, so now let's instead imagine that I'm paid over time. So that $4,000 a week figure, so that's $208,000 per year for the next 60 years. Okay, so we can see here, you know, if I look at my running total for the present value, this is very similar to being paid $2 million right now, okay, as a present value close to $2 million. Okay, but suppose I apply my utility function to each one of these present values, and then I look at the running total of that number. Okay, well, you can see that, well, what's going on is that, okay, for each one of these smaller payments, okay, I take the square root of that number, and it's a much smaller number, but I'm not really losing as much as compared to if this was a huge value here, okay? Because diminishing returns, the way they work is they sort of kick in more and more the larger the amount of money that you're actually looking at, okay? If you want a metaphor, remember that, you know, when we were adding workers to that firm, that was another example of diminishing returns, right? Well, the diminishing returns associated with a small number of workers aren't very pronounced. It's only till the firm got big, right? It's not until the firm got big and we had like 8 or 9 workers that you really saw the effects of the diminishing returns. Same concept here. If your income is relatively smaller, the degree of diminishing returns is less pronounced. And so if I look at my total utility in this case, okay, the present value of my utility, okay, that number is equal to 8,809. Okay, so in other words, $4,000 per week is associated with a total utility, total present value utility of 8,809, and that is much higher than the utility of the other option of the $2 million being paid today. Okay. Okay, so once we take utility into account, okay, you can see that actually, from that perspective, it makes a lot more sense to take the $2,000 per week. I'm sorry, the $4,000 per week. Okay. Economists, the jargon for this is that when people have these diminishing returns utility functions, we say that people like to smooth their income over time. Having this form of utility, okay, incentivizes you to prefer a lot of small payments over time rather than one big lump sum payment. Um, okay, so now disclaimer, okay, there's a lot of other reasons besides this theory of expected utility why people might prefer to smooth their income, to have a more constant income over time, right? For one thing, if you get a huge lump sum payment now, it can be sort of costly to figure out how much you want to save, right? Like you probably have to talk to a financial advisor or something to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with this $2 million? Well, the financial advisor isn't free, okay? And there's also the problem of temptation, right? If you receive a huge amount of money right now, you might be tempted to just blow it all and not save any of it, right? Versus, if you're getting paid a certain amount of money over time, well, then you're sort of forced to spend that money over time as well. Okay, so now I haven't really considered these two explanations because at some level, these explanations, especially the second one, involves some kind of limits to your rationality, right? To say that, okay, well, I prefer the money distributed over time instead of a lump sum because I know I'm going to blow the money and waste the money if I receive the lump sum. That's obviously sort of not a rational way to behave. But of course, that's often a very real way that people behave. Okay, and so in the next lecture is going to focus on behavioral economics, and behavioral economics deals with some of these psychological effects, these more realistic effects about how people might actually act. Okay, so those are the types of behaviors that we're going to be looking at in the next lecture. I think you'll find that lecture pretty interesting. Okay, so so I hope that all makes sense to you. Okay, the homework will consist largely of just a few additional examples where I expect you to compute the present value, get to know that spreadsheet a little bit better. Okay. I would say especially the students who are in the Luder School. If you're thinking about majoring in business, okay, when you take finance, when you take accounting, this concept of present value is going to come up again, and it's going to come up over and over. So hopefully that, if you go through these exercises right now, you'll be a little bit more familiar with this concept once you encounter them in another class. Okay? All right, so good luck with the homework, and I'll see you all next time.